Welcome to the Community Music Learning IJCM Conversation Series. Today I'm here with Don Coffman, one of the associate editors of the International Journal of Community Music. Welcome, Don.
Thank you.
Don, your background is in music education, and one big focus of yours is making music with older adults. Can you tell us how you became involved in the field of community music?
Well, honestly, I think I was just lucky. I was an assistant professor at the University of Iowa, been doing the job there for a while, and I was asked to attend a meeting about considering starting an adult band for older adults, and they didn't have to have experience, or maybe they'd played a long time ago. One of these programs had been started a couple of years back, and the National Association of Music Merchants was interested in seeing if this would catch on at other places, and the local music dealer happened to be president of it. So they described it, and I said, this can't lose. And I jumped in and started doing that. I started my band in 1995, and it's part of a movement called the New Horizons Music International. New Horizons International Music Association would be the full thing. So I did that for several years. In 1998, I became the chair-elect of the newly formed Special Research Interest Group in MENC, Music Educators National Conference in the United States, and was starting to basically promote the idea of adult learning in other areas. And in 2000, I noticed that for the first time, really, the Community Music Activities Commission in ISME. And I thought, hey, this is like what I'm doing, and I think maybe I should be part of it. And it was in Toronto, and so I went and did that and loved it, and went the following time in Rotterdam in 2000, and then in Singapore in 2006, and I became a commissioner in 2008. And then I chaired the seminar in Hangzhou, China in 2010. So that's a brief history of my involvement.
And did you always call your work with the New Horizons projects, did you always call it community music?
Initially, no. It's not a common term in the United States. People either play in a community band, or they sing in a community choir, or they're in community theater. So we use the word community, but community musician, referring to someone who facilitates it, that's kind of a non-starter for most folks. So I had to kind of wrap my head around it initially to get that perspective.
You've been a key figure in the International Journal of Community Music for many years now. Can you tell us about how you originally became involved with the journal, and also about your role over the years?
My involvement is from the beginning, because Lee Higgins asked me to be on the editorial board before the first issue actually appeared. He and I had met at that CMA in Toronto in 2000, and we later on co-edited the proceedings for the CMA seminar in Singapore in 2006. So we were familiar with how to work with each other. So I served as a reviewer for the next 9 years. And then in 2016, Lee saw that he needed more help. And he asked Bridie Lee Bartlett and me to become associate editors to help him plan for the journal and to carry out more of the review process. He'd been relying on assistants, paid assistants, but that funding dried up. So Lee and I, we got together and said, okay, we can do this. And I've been associate editor since then.
And that was because he became president of ISME, of the International Society of Music Education. So in addition to being an editor, you've been one of the authors contributing the most to the journal. And I have these numbers from your own article. You're one of 2 people who published the most articles in the journal, 8 articles. You were editor of 2 special issues. And your most cited paper in the IJCM is the survey of New Horizons International Music Association musicians. Why did you choose to publish all of this in the IJCM over this time and not elsewhere?
I guess I'll beat my own drum or toot my own horn. That article we're now talking about makes number 9 as I said earlier, the concept of someone self-identifying as a community musician is not familiar to a lot of practitioners in the United States. It may be familiar in the UK, but not in America. So when I first started to research in the area with older adults, I just viewed it as adult learning, adult education. But it really wasn't. It wasn't sitting in classrooms. And so I was trying to figure out where I fit in. And I discovered rather quickly that I didn't fit in. I'd go to conferences and present my research and poster sessions, and people would kind of walk by and say, and keep on walking, because I wasn't talking about kids in schools. I wasn't talking about training future music teachers. I was on the outside. So when I went to Toronto to the CMA seminar, I felt I'd found a home, and I immediately became quite loyal to this idea because I wanted friends, so to speak. And when the journal started up, it seemed like the logical thing to do, because I thought here I could put out work that I knew would have some listeners, and I also wanted to support the journal because I wanted it to grow. And looking back, I suppose that I put all my eggs in one basket. And I don't know if I would necessarily encourage people to do that now because they're worried about Scopus rankings and getting themselves widely known. But if you found the IJCM, you would find me, that's for sure. And so I've not regretted my choices. I just realized that I made a conscious effort to do that because I felt that I wanted my body of work to be in one place.
I find that really interesting, because your choices are really linked to the development of the field as well. And yeah, that's really, really fascinating. And your most recent paper, which you've just mentioned, is also or I also just mentioned, is the content analysis of the IJCM. Can you talk a little bit about this article? What motivated you to do this study? And what do you think its main takeaways are?
Well, the analysis has lots of numbers and figures and tables, and I'd love to go over all of that, but we don't have time, so I'll try and get some highlights. My co-author, who happens to be my son, and you know him well, we examined 45 issues over 15 years. About half of those issues, 22, were special issues with guest editors, and they were categorized as non-thematic, coming from past conferences, or thematic, arising in response to a specific call for papers for a theme. And one of the things I'd hoped to see in the journal, to do a content analysis over 15 years, I wanted to see if things shifted across time. A lot of content analyses seem to look at the body of a work of a journal or a proceedings or anything that's on paper and views it somewhat statically. Like, here's the sum total, and this amount is devoted to this and this and this. And I said, these are living things that actually change. So I wanted to see if things would develop and then later on influence other efforts or other issues. And in terms of the special issues, the idea of a special issue is to call attention to something. And I had assumed that people would see a special issue and contribute to it, and then maybe continue to contribute. Or others would see it and say, hey, here's a place for me because they're talking about this. Well, that hasn't really materialized. Most of the special issues have sort of been one-offs. And sometimes no articles have appeared afterwards that were related to that topic. Two that are exceptions would be the ones on community music therapy, and a very early one on community music in the criminal justice system. Those seem to have had some follow-up articles that at least were in the same vein or even cited some of the research there. So that was one finding that was something of a surprise. I wanted to see what kinds of articles were being submitted to the journal and accepted. And we ended up categorizing about 63% of them as research articles, which shouldn't be a surprise because it's a research journal. 25% were conceptual essays, and then the third most populated category was project reports, Project reports were more typical in the early years. People were describing what they did, and those have been declined some because of the increase in the number of research articles. People basically have shifted from describing their project to also describing their project with qualitative research by asking questions of people. So there's some similarities, but they've approached it with some different protocols. Those people who've read Lee Higgins' book, Community Music in Theory and Practice, know that he defined community music in three ways: music as an intervention, music that is communal, and music of a community. And so I thought it would be important to see what kinds of approaches were being employed in these articles of research. And just over 60% of the articles were music as an intervention, which also should not be a surprise because that's been the focus of CMA over the years. Communal music making makes up about 25%, and the remainder of it is music of a particular community. And another big takeaway is that, again, no surprise really, but over 90% of the articles come from North America, Europe, and the Asia-Pacific region, particularly Australia. It's an English-speaking journal. It was founded by Lee and Kari and David Elliott, Kari Veblen. And so we've got that European, North American emphasis from the start. Now, we spent a lot of time looking at what was in there and probably try and figure out what's not in there, maybe should have been. And those are harder to find because you have to kind of think outside the box. One thing that from coming to a lot of conferences and seminars, people are talking about over the years is assessing what the impacts of CMA activity is. Realizing we have to justify, explain to funders and about this. So the idea of assessment efforts, I expected to see something about that, and there's virtually nothing other than sometimes an offhanded comment about we should be doing more of this or this is hard. And so I see this as a sort of a vacuum in what's being put out there, and that might be something people would like to work towards contributing. Knowing this is a concern of mine, I will give a shout out to Bridie Lee Bartlett's article that appeared in 16.1 of last year about measuring the impact of community music. I think that's a good place to launch future research.
And there is a video on the Community Music Learning YouTube channel about where Bridie talks about this article of the impact in community music. So for people who are interested, they can see her talk about this. What I find really interesting is that the first point you made, that you said there was very little follow-up. So people published once as part of a special issue, and then you didn't feel like it sort of launched an inquiry in a certain field or region or something. So why is that? Or what do you think?
I have thought about it. It's all speculation because I've not asked people. Some people, when they submit to a special issue, I can see from some of the way they approach it and the literature they include, their radar is not focused on community music. It's focused on the particular topic, and they sort of make it fit. And so once it's accepted for that, you can look at them and say, okay, that's sort of on the periphery, but okay, it's here. And they made it in, and so it actually doesn't surprise me that they didn't continue to submit, because that's really, community music is not what's driving their issue. It seems to be related or tangential at times, but I think that explains a number of people, because they see an opportunity and then they go for it. What I would hope is that they would find some affinity with the other articles that were in the issue or something like that, and it would continue on. But so far not. And yeah, it's been such a long-standing pattern that I'm not even sure if it should be an expectation of mine.
That or how to work with that, because I find that a really interesting observation. Like what can one do about this? I don't know. So I want to move on to another article that I've used a lot in my own teaching, and I think I was there when you presented on it in 2013 in Munich at the Community Music Conference. It's called Common Ground for Community Music and Music Education. I found this really useful, and I think it is still really useful. And I'd like you to talk a bit more about this article. It's now 11 years old, so you can sort of look back at it. What motivated you to write it at the time, and how do you see it now?
And thank you for using it. That wasn't one that I thought would have a lot of staying power. I wrote it for a conference, and anyway, well, my motivation for doing it, as I said before, it was community musician as a term is unfamiliar to me when I started. And when I went to the seminar in Toronto, I said I met Lee Higgins there. I should amplify that by saying we were roomies, all staying in dormitories, and he and I were assigned to the same room. And so in one of our early conversations, I was describing what I did with older adults. It was in a wind band setting, and we played concerts and things like that. And he said, well, that's not community music. And I looked at him, and I was flabbergasted. I said, what do you mean? I was confused, and I was angry. And so it took us during the week back and forth discussing what community music was, and in his mind was and wasn't. And he had a lot more experience with it. And so I started to appreciate what some of his concerns were. And one of his concerns was, well, there's a very clear leader in front. And we're using music, so there's music literacy is expected. And we're not doing anything with he's a rock guy. He's punk rock, plays guitar, and he's in that kind of music. And I was in classical music with wind bands and stuff. And so the venues seemed to be different, and we didn't do anything with the improvisation. We weren't asking them to go to a workshop and create music and express themselves that way. So I said, okay, we are looking at this differently. Is there something that we share in common? Because to me, we were both accomplishing similar aims of empowering people basically to be more of who they really wanted to be. So after that seminar, I went looking for more information, scoured the internet, because this was years before Lee's book came out. It was a couple of years before Kari Veblen's chapter on community music had appeared in the New Handbook of Research in Music and Learning, Music Teaching and Learning. So there wasn't much out there. But what I found was a number of short essays that were basically rejecting music education as something to be desired for people because it was too authoritarian, it was too much about music theory, and I thought, yeah, there's some elements of truth in it. I'm feeling I'm being painted with a brush too broadly. It just didn't resonate with what I saw some things happening in music education. So I started thinking, well, I think it needs more dialogue here. And so far, it's been going one direction. So I started writing about it and talking about it and presenting at CMA seminars. And by the time that 2013 seminar came out in Munich that you're referring to, Lee's book had appeared about a year before. And so I read it cover to cover several times, trying to understand all of this. And I started to see that I thought that some of his arguments needed to be nuanced a little bit more. I didn't quite, I saw what he was saying, and I didn't say, oh, you're absolutely wrong, but I said, I think you've stretched this a little bit too far. So in that presentation you referred to, and in this article, I have used a number of tables from his book and some of my own to talk about what I see as slight differences and more what we have in common. I also talked about the number of at the time, the institutions that are offering degrees in community music. There were more, of course, in the UK. And in the 10 years, 11 years since then, there's not been a lot of growth in the United States in higher education degrees. At the time, there was NYU, and there's one Wilfrid Laurier in Canada, and let's see, there's one in Massachusetts, I believe, in Lowell, and now one in USC. But it's not like there's a lot of people jumping on the bandwagon saying, we're going to offer degrees in this. I hear more and more people talking about it. But in truth, I don't know that there needs to be a lot of degrees in the United States for it, because it's just not recognized as a, if the mentality is get this degree so you can get a job, you get this degree and then you have to go make your job, so to speak. Looking back at the time I was, when I was writing it, I was aware of some disruptive technologies occurring at the time. They were called massive open online courses, MOOCs. And so the internet was taking off in offering courses for anybody. They were sometimes free, or they were sometimes a minimal charge, and you can get a certificate for taking the course. And I thought, hey, this might be a way for professional development to occur. And so I was suggesting that as a way for community musicians to train music educators and vice versa. We could work back and forth in these online communities. Well, that hasn't really materialized, and even COVID-19 and getting us to Zoom everything hasn't basically changed the ethos of you still have to have a need for wanting to be trained in some particular way for this really to take off. We're much better positioned to actually do this type of thing, but the thinking behind it has not matched the change in technology.
Interesting. Well, for the German context, it's been really, really helpful, that article, I find. So, So I want to now sort of switch the focus on your role as part of the editorial team, associate editor, and also because you've been involved from the very beginning. Obviously, you have a real view on the development of the journal over all these years. And now we've had a change in senior editorship from Lee Higgins over to Roger Mantai. And I'd like to know what your perspective on what you see as a sort of future for the journal now that a new phase has sort of started.
Yeah, Lee stepped down in 2022 after 14 years on it. And Roger's involvement, one of the first things we started doing was meeting more regularly. Lee, when you're covering multiple time zones, finding a common time is a challenge. And poor Bridie, she ends up doing it really early in the morning to meet with Roger and I. But it was even worse when Lee was involved, because we covered half the globe. But now we meet about monthly and discuss how things are going. And so we're trying to basically codify some processes. One thing we've done is we have an editorial board. We needed to expand it some because, people are busy, and we need as many hands make light work, so to speak. So we expanded it, and in the process of that, we also realized that no one should feel that they're on the editorial board for life. And so we've tried to install term limits. Now, once your term is up, we're looking at 6 years, you could renew if you'd like, but it's an opportunity to graciously say, okay, I've done my bit. And so that's one procedural thing we've done. We've also trying to increase the clarity of what our expectations are for journals. So we've been working on the instructions for submitters, and in tandem with that, more clear instructions for our reviewers. And all this is being done in sort of collaboration with the editorial board, because we meet with them twice a year, and they offer some great suggestions. So it's a benefit to actually see them because many times I've just emailed people for years and not even known who they looked like. But now we can chat and do things in real time. Another aspect we're trying to do is, since special issues have been a constant with the journal, we see no reason to stop that. It brings in variety, and it helps with getting out issues. That way we have another team that's involved and a content that's basically locked up for a particular issue. And so we are trying to think of topics and guest editors going into the future of the next 2 to 3 years and keeping that going, because it does take a while to have a call for papers and collect them and things like that. But rather than just rely on whatever comes in the door, and do we like it or not, we can target things and try and speak to issues that we feel are important for community music.
No, but again, it shows that you've been involved since the very beginning when none of this was in place. And this takes time, doesn't it? It shows how the sort of field is established and things like that get decided only later. Yeah. Don, thank you so much. That was really interesting. I kind of wished we had a whole episode on these individual papers because they're so interesting. So I think we should think about that, whether we want to do that at some point. But I thank you for being here, Don, and thank you everyone for listening to this newest episode of the IJCM podcast series. Thank you.
Thank you. It's been fun.